Welcome to our Azure Incident Retrospective. I'm David Steele.
I'm Sami Kuba. We work in the Azure Communications team.
In addition to providing a written post-incident review after major outages, we also now host these retrospective conversations.
You're about to watch a recording of a live stream where we invited impacted customers through Azure Service Health to join our panel of experts in a live Q&A.
We had a conversation about reliability as a shared responsibility. So this includes our learnings at Microsoft, as well as guidance for customers and partners to be more resilient.
We hope you enjoy the conversation that follows. Super. So today's incident we're going to talk about is a Windows update. Now, this was impacting Azure virtual machines, Azure Virtual Desktop, and even on-premises. Impact started on the 13th of May, but we couldn't do a lot for customers until the 24th of May when we told customers, hey, probably best not to install this update. And then we added an out-of-band update all the way to the 31st of May. So it was a big potential impact window for this incident.
It sounds like a long window. As we'll explain today, hopefully it wasn't as bad as we say it was. To talk us through the incident and those learnings, I'd like to introduce our engineering leaders on our guest panel today. First up, we have Rodney Bryan, our Vice President of Software Engineering from our Windows Services and Delivery team. And on the end, we have Rajesh Dadia, our VP of Engineering from the Windows Cloud Engineering team, which includes Azure Virtual Desktop, which we'll be talking about a lot today.
Super. Rodney, before we get into the actual incident itself, can I ask you, Windows, we release updates all the time. I know this is something we have to do to keep the world safe and protected. Well, how does Windows update usually happen, and what made this particular update different?
Fair enough. We update the ecosystem, right? 1.7 billion devices with security fixes each month, right? You probably heard of a Patch Tuesday, right? So Patch Tuesday happen every second Tuesday of the month. Right. We also have a D release. So you have the Patch Tuesday, which is for us internally, we call it B release. And then we also call the fourth Tuesday of each month a D release. And that's where we will release some quality fixes. Everything that's in a D release, right? Everything that's in a B release is also part of the D. So then D goes to B and B goes to D. So we have one service in line for each product. So it's a cumulative effect.
So some customers might choose just to install the B release, which is just the security update.
Yes.
And some customers will take the D release, which is those plus features.
Exactly, right? So there's customers who just go from B to B.
Got it.
Right? But knowing that when they install the next B, it's all the content that was in the D.
Sure.
Fair enough? All right. So to deliver that much security fixes, those are need changes, right? We do invest a lot in trying to make sure that we find all the issues, right? It's a big job, right? We strive for perfection, but clearly perfection is not something that we achieved, right? And we did learn a lot from this. There's things that we have done to make sure that this specific thing doesn't happen again. And perfection is what we're seeking, and we'll see where we land and on that path.
Great. That's a good overview for how updates should normally work, and a good teaser campaign for the outage itself. Rajesh, I'd love to bring you in here as well, because obviously AVD, Azure Virtual Desktop, you consume these updates from Windows. How does that usually work? How should that happen?
Yeah, I mean, so there are AVD customers. It's a big install base. Today we have close to, or 4 million users, using basically, on a monthly basis, actively using this. So we have different variety of customers. Some customers have their own patch management solutions in place. So for example, SCCM, System Center Config Manager. That's a tool customers use. On the other hand, some customers also have directly configured to use Windows Update service. And so depending on what's your mode of, or you could actually be using your in-house or a third-party solution as well. Depending on how you configured your patch management, you could have been sort of impacted differently based on that.
That's interesting to understand. Here, naively, I just assumed that AVD would be in charge of patching all of the AVD resources, but that's actually up to the individual customers to control that for the individual host pools that they administrate?
Yeah, so that's a great sort of clarification here. Because with AVD, the primary service that we provide is essentially the connectivity infrastructure for customers to connect, their application, Windows app or RD client, to connect to their backend host pools and the VMs in the host pools that they are configured by them. So the responsibility of the management of those VMs sort of are assumed by the customers. in this case. We have other service such as Windows 365, where it's a SaaS form factor and where we actually work more closely. For example, those customers use Intune. But in case of AVD, essentially all the host pools are managed by the customers.
All right, super. So we know how Windows does updates. We know how AVD consumes them. If we put ourselves now the 13th of May, this update has come out. This is a B update on the 13th, or was it it was a B update, right? It was a B update. What did customer impact? I'll start with Rajesh. What did customer impact feel like for AVD customers? And then Rodney, if you could tell us about the other billions of devices, what does that look like? But Rajesh, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, so one thing I would say here, I mean, like Rodney said, we strive for perfection. On our end, also, we strive for detecting these kind of customer issues a priori on our end, which means that if our customer base is basically impacted by any changes in our ecosystem, we want to be the first to know. And so we have active alerting, monitoring in place. However, in this case, we were not able to basically detect the impact, and it was reported by the customer. And in cases where those VMs, the backend VMs, were affected, once they were affected, and they're impacted by this incident, they were inaccessible, by the end user. So the typical report was essentially the connectivity breakdown and not really knowing what exactly happened.
So to understand that's because this update was trying to be applied and the update wasn't able to be successful, and therefore we got these boot failures that were described. Rodney, is that the right way to kind of think about this?
Yes. So the issue was scoped to the attempt to install the update.
Right.
The update itself was a quality update. Actually, it was a good update. It had a lot of high quality security fixes in it. But the issue was the installation of the update.
Got it. So some of those installs worked fine, but some of those installs didn't go
correct. So at the point of the incident, we were seeing up to 33 million devices who had successfully installed the update.
Okay.
Right. And so from our telemetry, we weren't seeing a problem, right? Until we started getting feedback that AVD customers were having this experience, right? And now once we know about that, again, we engaged, trying to understand the root cause of what's going on.
Sure, you have to put $1 in the root cause jar. We tread carefully around here. We always have multiple contributing factors that put dollars there. But I'd love to understand, what was that trigger event, or why couldn't some of those installs, install successfully?
Yeah, we added a dependency between two critical binaries, and once we have an installation failure, right? So the actual failure was in trying to roll back the installation. Right. So the failure happened for whatever reasons. We tried to roll back, and the effort to roll back to where we were, we hit a crash because we had a mismatch of two binaries. Binary A had a hard dependency on binary B, but while rolling back, B could have been removed before. A is not there. Hey, what shall I call crash?
It reaches for something that doesn't exist,
correct,
and so that causes those boot failures.
Exactly. Right. And so once we found that, we said, fine, we will go in and make the change to remove the dependency, so rollback can actually happen. So the fix was actually to a error path, meaning that installation failed. And while we're trying to recover from that, we failed.
Got it. And we need to make sure the installation can fail successfully.
Correct.
Got it. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, I am curious to know, because we released an out-of-band update, we did this at the end of May. I don't know if AVD consumed this. I'd be interested to know. But should I think that there are still customers out there, if they haven't installed the out-of-band update, if they haven't patched Tuesday since then, and they're still running on the previous version, are they at risk? Or once the installation's done, is it a success and they have nothing to worry about?
Yes. Once installation is complete, your device is secure with the payload of patch to Tuesday. Okay. This issue was specific to failure to install, failure to recover from the installation. But once you have it installed, right, that particular release was a high quality release that your device is now secure.
Perfect. Okay.
Yes, that's a good starting point. And AVD was able to consume the out-of-band update once that D release came out at the end of the month?
Yeah, we provided, we proactively communicated with the customers. We put comms out there essentially to letting them know. In fact, even while this incident was going on, another update was put for customers who wanted to proactively actually get that and apply that. The ones who have not actually consumed the update, the faulty update, they had the option to get another update before the new update was pushed out by Windows Update. So we essentially provided customers that option as well.
Got it. So they didn't have to wait for the out-of-band update. Either of those would have helped to resolve it. Okay. This is probably a good time for us to pivot towards our learnings and repair items.
It is. And there's one piece, particularly learning around detection. We talk about billions of devices and AVD being there. It took us a while to get that message out for customers. And I know that the percentage was small, but a small number of billions of devices is still a small percentage of a billion devices is still pretty big. How can we do better with these weird ones that creep in?
Great question. We have data scientists, right? But that will begin to look at, here's a cohort, right, of the 1.7 billion devices that are having a experience that doesn't align with what we expect, right? And so how big does a cohort needs to be to flag our attention, right? In this case, we had 7,000 devices impacted across 1.7 billion, right? I still have a gap, right? And so the key thing that I have to go back with the team is try to understand, how do we go and find a cohort that's having not the size of the cohort, but the experience that cohort is having should impact the priority of how we engage.
Cool. That's great to hear. There might be some detection-related learnings there. And then, Rodney, Rajesh, I'm interested. One of the repair items in the post-incident review from the AVD side was talking about improving some of our documentation for IT administrators. Is that specifically around recovering from this kind of thing, or avoiding it in the first place?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of parts to that, basically. I think there are some, in terms of like preventive care, if I may say so. There are some guidance in terms of like customers making sure that the updates are validated before they're actually consumed or deployed en masse. And a lot of our customers do that, so there's always a best practice. This does not take our responsibility to detect incident on our end by any means, but there's always essentially a partnership in terms of this kind of a model where customers are taking responsibility of managing their host pools and AVDs providing the connectivity services. So that's one part of it. In terms of recovery, I think there are also practices around recovery. I think we have provided detailed documentation on that. Now, services like Windows 365, for example, which is a complementary to AVD, which is more of a SaaS form factor than a PaaS form factor like AVD, they provide the capability where we take the snapshots of these machines. So at any given point, when you run into a situation like this, you can always restore using those. But in this case, since AVD is managed by customers, the host pools are managed by them, the responsibility sort of falls on the customers to figure out how they're going to be taking the snapshots of these, and that could be essentially another mitigation in these kind of situations.
And Rodney, can I ask, outside of detecting repairs and learnings around detection, you also spoke about repairs and learnings around the out-of-band updates and removing the dependencies. Could you talk to us a little bit more about that?
So the release that was impacted, right? The releases impacted were 22H2 and 23H2, right? So we call that nickel, right? And then there's the GE, which is 24H2. This particular change was in the 24H2 for a long period of time. We didn't have this issue, right? So we will normally verify these changes before we put them into a security update, right? Especially the ones that are not specific to security, right? And so we have a SUVP program where it's a program in which customers get to see the pre-release versions of our security updates, right? And give us feedback, right? And so our customers reviewed this, right? And then hit the issue, right? Because it was a timing issue, right? It's not 100% repro, right? And so we have I say now, the false confidence that, hey, this change worked in release A, right? It should also work, right? In release B, we did the same validation, but we made a mistake, right? And so now that we have found this mistake, right, we now have added additional test collateral to verify the rollback path, right? And this particular issue here, like I said earlier, wasn't a 100% repro, right? The installation had to be disturbed, right, at a certain point, right, for it to repro, right? And so we have now made that investment that we will disturb the rollback, disturb the installation to cover as much of the timing issues that we could have in the rollback path while trying to make the rollback path more robust.
It's great to hear that. That sounds like a lot of the fault injection technologies that we use in Azure to kind of break things on purpose. So you're going to go and disrupt that installation to make sure it behaves.
Yes, I'll be great at failure.
That sounds good to me. Rajesh, maybe the last question for you here, because you touched on it a little bit about having these two different host pools. So it sounds like that's one of our kind of best practice or recommendations for customers who are more risk averse here. And could you just talk us through what that actually looks like for customers to self-manage those updates on two different pools? I'm worried maybe about the cost or the complexity of customers, taking that on board.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I think there's always, when you're trying to add resiliency to the system, there's always a trade-off, right? And one of the trade-off is essentially to have a backup host pool of sort, right? Or have multiple host pools where updates are applied essentially, not all at once, but distributing essentially the overall sort of VM footprint across multiple host pools, such that the impact is not all at once, and so that's one of the practices actually customers can follow in this case. We are also doing a lot of things like Rodney mentioned on our end to make sure that we are better equipped to detect these issues on our end as well. The investments we are making, like Rodney said, investments on his end. And one of the things I'd like to mention here is that the reason this issue was not detected on our end as well is because the failure path is essentially during rollback. So then you have to understand, why do actually these rollbacks happen? And these rollbacks really happen anytime Windows Update is being applied. If there is a state change, the VM goes through. And those state changes can happen for different reasons, because in the cloud environment, if you're scaling up or scaling down these VMs, those state changes can happen, or sometimes customers can actually push their own sort of scaling plans, which can actually induce state changes. And thus, you hit the failure path. So one of the things we have to do is understand what we can do our end to exactly mimic, those customer workflows, as well as build some of the awareness of the patching states, right? So if we are aware, if we are smart and intelligent in terms of knowing that, these machines are going through essentially updates, can those state changes be delayed? There are things that we could potentially do on our end. There are things we can do working with the Azure compute team, to drive some of those, that awareness essentially. And so those are some of the things we are looking at.
Great, a great way of kind of de-risking some of those things. So we've covered a lot of learnings here. We've talked about learnings from the Windows side to improve this. We've got definitely learnings from the AVD side. At this point in our live stream, I'd like to turn my attention to my co-host, Sammy. Sammy runs our Azure communications team. So Sammy, are there learnings from a comms perspective? How did we do keeping customers up to date?
This was very tricky. One of the key metrics or the primary measures that we have in the communications world is our time to notify. How long does it take to notify customers? And typically we're talking hours, minutes, sometimes even seconds. But here we were talking about days and weeks. There was an issue. It was hard to tell who, because you're talking about when something installs, is the rollback, it's only when the installation fails that we have an issue. So it was actually a couple of weeks after we first got notified. The first thing we did is put a big banner on our status page, because we didn't know who to communicate to, but we were getting reports of customer failings, customers who bring their teams into their data centers or into their offices, and they spin up Azure Virtual Desktops, and there was nothing they could have done, or customers who are rendering animations and movie productions and those virtual desktops are down. In the beginning, we put up a banner that was very broad awareness, But very quickly, a couple of hours after that, we managed to target the Azure Virtual Desktop customers. We ended up sending messages to all Azure Virtual Desktop customers to say, hey, listen, there's an issue with this update, you shouldn't install. And it was a workaround. And I think it's really awkward to tell customers not to install something, particularly when they've got auto updates going on. So it was tricky. When the out of band update came out, we told them about this as well. So we kind of walked customers through it. I think it's the first time we've seen an issue like this, where it's, it's with Windows consuming and it was with updates, and the action to tell customers is that don't do what Azure's asking you to do, or don't do what your native applications would typically do. So it was a tricky one. We definitely over communicated. So like the whole theme of the incident is most customers wouldn't have noticed this. It's impacted a very small number of customers, but we did give a warning to all the Azure Virtual Desktop customers just to be wary of these updates.
Got it. So a little slow off the mark there, but then we were able to bring customers along for the journey and explain it to them. Okay, well, that's a great wrap of all the different kind of parts of Microsoft this incident touched. Thank you for watching this Azure Incident Retrospective.
At the scale of which our cloud operates at, incidents are inevitable.
Just as Microsoft is always learning and improving, we hope our customers and partners can learn from these too, and provide a lot of reliability guidance through the Azure Well-Architected framework.
To ensure that you get posted incident reviews after an outage, and invites to join these live stream Q&A sessions, please ensure that you have Azure Service Health Alerts set up.
We really focused on being as transparent as possible and showing up and being accountable after these major incidents.
Whether it's an outage, a security, or a privacy event, Microsoft is investing heavily in these events to ensure that we earn, maintain, and at times rebuild your trust. Thanks for joining us.